Okay, let's make a start, everyone. So welcome to our Audit Committee meeting this evening. Particularly welcome to Sandeep Vig this evening, who's our second independent member, joins Mike Drake, who's also an independent member. Thank you very much for joining us and good to see you in person this evening. Andrew, would you be able to introduce everyone else that we have here just for the benefit of the new members? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I start with the people online first. So from our external auditors, EY, we've got Janet Dawson, the partner, and Hannah Lill, senior manager with EY. Also online, we've got Catherine Hickman, head of internal audit and investigations. We've got Graham Cadle, who's the assistant director for finance. We have Mark Thompson, chief accountant. And I think I've covered everyone online. I just moved to the officers in the room. To my right, we've got George Ramalico, who's the director of Place and Growth, and George is here tonight to cover the corporate risk register item. Paul Ocean Ellis, who's the governance and risk manager. And over to my left, two colleagues from Democratic Services, Madeline Shopland and Liam Olith. And I'm Andrew Moulton, Assistant Director Governance.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Right, so do we have any apologies for this evening? No apologies, great. So the minutes of the previous meeting, are we all happy that those are correct record? Can I see a show of hands? Yep, thank you very much. The actions list was circulated to members by email. Were there any comments or questions arising from the actions list that was circulated? No? Okay, let's move on then. Are there any declarations of interest? Does anyone have one? Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I think I need to declare an interest in item 41, which is the corporate risk register. Same as before, because I'm a foster carer, so I've got an interest in risks 5 and 14. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. Are there any public or member questions? No. All right, so we will move on to our first substantive item this evening, which is the audit update from EY. So I'll hand over to Janet for this one. Thank you.
Janet, sorry, you're on mute.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Hannah. You've got a fairly brief update in front of you, which takes you through the progress that we've been making, which has been good progress with the finance team. We've been working well together. I was just going to hand over to Hannah and hope that she can just take you through the detail of that before her computer decides to go into an auto restart, which it's apparently telling her it's going to do, in which case I'll then step back in and pick up where she leaves us.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. Yes, I was just going to reiterate what Janet said, really, that we've been progressing the audit well. We've had really good engagement with officers and we've been working well together to get as much work completed as we can. We're not exactly where we wanted to be at this stage, but we've got more resources lined up and have agreed the timing of that with officers to still complete the field work by the end of December, which was what we were hoping to do. We still have some delays in obtaining some of the information around valuations, so that is still an area that is at risk of being able to complete by the end of December, but we're working hard with officers to kind of mitigate those and get as much of the information as we can. We also have had correspondence with Deloitte in respect of the IS 19 assurances, and at this point they cannot give us a time of when or if we will get those assurances. And that's everything that we have really to say on the 21-22 financial statements. In terms of the timing of 22-23, this is still dependent on the resolution of 21-22, and we are still waiting for the announcement from DLUC that was discussed at the last meeting. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that update. It's good to hear that's good progress overall. Questions. So I've got Stephen and then Sam and then Peter. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's good to hear this progress. I had a couple of concerns, and it may be that my colleagues have got similar concerns. So you haven't been able to complete the audit. You've identified 2 key reasons in the report. I just wasn't clear from that as to whether this was a member of staff within your audit team or whether it was a council officer, which was referred to in the first bullet. And also, obviously, there's issues with the valuations. And I noticed that you've also agreed additional time. I wasn't sure if that also then meant that there would be additional cost, and that would be a concern. So I just wondered if we could have a little bit more detail around that to try and not, I'm not looking to sort of try and blame people, but what I'm trying to find is how can we prevent these things happening in future? How can we get it right so that we don't have delays like this? And the second thing, as I've mentioned before, for my interest in representing the borough on the Berkshire Pension Fund, I was surprised at your comments about that because I thought that had all been resolved. So I wonder if there's more information you can give me, because when I've been attending the Berkshire Pension Funds meetings, I thought that had all been signed off and closed out. So I'm a bit confused by that one. So thank you.
Thanks. If I could just add to a couple of those points, actually, because I was going to raise a couple of those things. In terms of the member of staff, I believe it's a EY member of staff. So it would be useful to know a bit more about your quality checking procedures, because obviously that's, that's delaying the audit, and audit's already delayed. So I'd be interested to know why, that quality issue wasn't picked up. And then on the valuation point as well, it would be useful to know if that delay is to do with an issue with the external valuers, or whether it's a delay to do with council officers, or a bit of both. Thank you.
Shall I, let me come in, and then I can see that Graham has popped on as well. So in terms of the staff issue, I think actually what I would say is we did pick it up, and we do have, it is an EY member of the team who was struggling. We did pick it up, and therefore, we're needing to do some additional work. So I take great comfort in the fact that, we make sure that we've got all the right work done to the right quality before we're ready to sign off. I understand from your perspective that looks like a delay to the audit. Clearly, there's no cost just on the point of fee that would be passed on to you as a result of our performance issues. So we need to have a look at the overall cost of the audit, but we would not pass that cost on to you. Associated with our own individual member of staff's issues. What I would say on valuations, that it's probably a little bit of both, but Graham may want to make a comment on that in terms of whether the external valuers have quite understood the questions we're asking, or that officers are quite understanding the importance of the questions that we're asking to be able to get through and get to the right quality of answer for those. And then on the pension fund, we have not got the audit for the pension fund, or the assurances that we need for the year under audit at the moment. So 21-22, Deloitte have not provided that assurance, and they have not completed that audit.
Graham, did you want to come in? No?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add up, if in the stream of honesty, the valuation office is part of that work we outsource, so we get an independent view. Unfortunately, one of the issues that's causing all this to be a bit more complicated is the time lag. And one of the members of staff had left that did some of the initial work, and then I think there's an issue of us making sure we make them know how important and how urgent it is. So I think, as Janet and Hannah have said, we've, rather than additional resource, we've moved the resource around to kind of meet availability, but that's something as WBC we are working to make sure the right information is provided across. Also add in terms of pensions that we have written and are contacting both the Pensions Authority and the council that oversee it to try and push forward. We're looking at every opportunity to try and move that work forward. Unfortunately, we're a bit stuck, and you'll remember for those members of the committee that were here kind of, I guess, halfway through this year, we had a similar issue with 2021 accounts. We looked then at options as to whether we would just have the accounts qualified, to move on. And there are obviously, downsides to that for the organisation going forward. So we are a bit stuck. Again, as Janet and Hannah have said, we expect DLUC to announce something hopefully fairly soon about maybe some timelines for different years' reports, and that may help us focus on what the approach is if that pensions work doesn't progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if we could move to Sam next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I think, yeah, looking at this, yeah, really appreciate your honesty in that it's the internal E&Y issue that you're resolving, really, the causing the delay. I'm just really keen to understand really more I guess, any other sort of delays that we're causing you. I think that, that may be leading to increased costs for us, and also anything that we can do, to sort of mitigate that, and also any, just from your workings with us previously, even I appreciate that, Graham, you mentioned those issues even last year and the year before that as well, where it feels like sitting on this committee, there seems to be, there's always a delay every year, and normally it's us causing the issues, but just want to know what we could do as a organisation to help you sort of get the information you need, because clearly there's an issue here that is causing a big backlog, and it may just get worse.
Thank you. During the summer, we did have some delays in obtaining responses from officers, mainly relating to the period when we'd started the 2021-22 audit, but the 2021 audit was not yet signed, and therefore officers were rightly prioritising finalising the 2021 audit over delivering responses to us in relation to 2021-22. Since then, we've worked really well and really hard with officers to ensure that they are aware of any priority items on our list, and they can then focus on those ones primarily. And we have also been working with them in terms of setting out our own work plan, so they know what areas of the audit we are planning to do at what time, and that's helped enable them to focus their resources into what kind of areas the queries might be coming, and that has really helped the progress through that October visit, and we're maintaining that through the visit that will be starting next week.
Thank you. Okay, and Peter?
Sorry, Chair, could I?
Oh, sorry, Graham. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So, I mean, and just to remind members, some of the delays are outside of our control, unfortunately. So we talked about the pension matter. So that was outstanding last year. I think it was last June we bought the final accounts with that caveat outstanding of pensions. There was also a national issue around infrastructure that was also outside of our control to an extent. So the pensions issue is still there because they're still catching up as well, and this is a national issue. There's several hundred local authorities with delays of either more than us or less than us, and that's why DLUC are now looking at something to try and bring people up to date. So I back up what we're saying with Hannah. I think we are working really well together. There is a pressure in the Wokingham team because at the moment we're dealing with at times 4 years accounts. We were dealing with 2021, 21-22, closing 22-23, and obviously in 23-24. So we're having to prioritise that work. But I'm grateful to EY for their approach as well, because I think generally we've worked well together with it.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank
you. Peter?
My observation was similar to Stephen's about the staff member. I'm glad to hear that EY won't be charging us for any delays, but for the council, there must be additional costs, certainly time from the teams having to support the extended audit process. And whilst I'm sure, can't submit a bill to EY, I would hope that at the end of the audit process, that's taken into account if there's any other on costs that might be added in.
Okay, thank you. I think that was more of a comment rather than a question. Yeah, all right. Mike.
Just a question with regard to consolidation of Optalis. It mentions here you're in discussion with management. Perhaps you could give a bit of an insight on where you are with the accounting. Will it all be consolidated? Will it not? and any issues you have at the moment or concerns.
Yes, certainly. So the group structure of the Optalis group changed on the 2nd of March 2022. So we have been discussing with officers on whether it is appropriate, well, whether it is material to make the amendment prior to the year end, because the change happened 1 month prior to the end of the year, or whether the change could be put through the financial statements.
I think we may have lost Hannah. I think her computer may have reset. So the issue, Mike, is as she was just explaining, the because the transaction or the change in group structure took place 1 month before the year end, the actual impact is not material to the accounts. However, it wouldn't reflect the appropriate, the actual situation as at the 31st of March 22 if we left that group structure as though they were still consolidated. So we're just having a look at the two different options to determine. I think Graham, I'm right in saying that the draft accounts were prepared on the basis that the change hadn't gone through, and so we just want to understand what the accounting difference would look like and whether or not that would be misleading to the reader before we determine the answer to that.
Yeah, I could understand that from an income statement point of view, but from a balance sheet point of view, I would have thought you'd want to deconsolidate if you haven't got legal.
Well, exactly, and that's the position. So we're just having a look at that.
Thank you.
Mark, did you want to come in? Or?
Yeah, it's just to follow up. So for 21-22, we've accounted on full consolidation, and we've submitted our reasons for that to EY, and that was based purely on materiality. We felt the fact of the 1 month's change didn't warrant, from a reader's point of view, go into the new accounting treatment, which would be an equity basis. Optalis, from a balance sheet point of view, have very small assets, and from an income and expenditure point of view, break even, so they don't make any profit. So when we look at it from that point of view, we felt it didn't make a significant impact on the reader of the account. So that was our proposal to EY, and they're currently reviewing that, and we're waiting to hear what their thoughts are.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Any other questions on the audit update from members? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on then to the risk register. Oh, Mike, sorry.
Sorry, while we're on, it's not really audit, but while we're on financial statements, I went on to the website today to try to print off a copy of the March 21 accounts, the last side. And I don't think you can. It's all the previous years are on, but not that one. And it says you've got to send an email to business services and it takes 5 days to come back. So I didn't think that was great. But what was on was a copy of the March 22 accounts in draft format with bits missing, and it says schedules to be completed in September. And I'm a bit surprised we have partial set of accounts unaudited.
Okay, we'll let Graham.
Particularly when we haven't got the previous year that has been signed.
I think it's a case that we have to publish something for the March 22. Is that right, Graham?
Yes, well, you're supposed to publish something. Our judgment is, as I've explained, we're having to work on 3 or 4 years accounts at the moment. Rather than put our efforts into completing a full set that in fact could change as we go through the different years audits, we focus on trying to clear the older year. So we've put up what we've got. We are progressing, and hopefully we'll have almost a full set of accounts for 22-23 in the next month or so. But we put our focus towards the older year and then getting the full information as we go through. I will have a look at your point, though, however, about needing to contact business services, because that doesn't feel right. So I'll have a look at whether we can make that simpler, with the caveats that the more recent years are not complete.
Thank you, Graham. Perhaps we could have a link to the 21 accounts, like in the
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for picking that up. Okay, we'll move on to the risk register then. I'm very pleased to welcome George Ramalico here to present this item this evening. Just a reminder to members in terms of our role with this. I'm just conscious we've got a lot to get through this evening. So our role is to gain assurance that risks being properly identified and properly managed. So when you're thinking about your questions, if you can have that in mind, that will be great. So are you introducing this, George? Yeah.
And I'll keep to a very brief introduction as well. So just to headline the key issues with the risk register since you last considered the register itself. I think the main corporate risks are the same in terms of the key one being budget and financial position and our resilience. And as the report sets out, the next key risk issues, cybersecurity, adult social care supply, sustainability and sufficiency, and then outcomes and costs for children with SEND. Just to headline the first issue, and I'm sure members are indeed aware that the council's position in year forecasting an overspend of 3.6 million and for 24-25 a gap at the moment in revenue of 5 million and a significant gap in our capital programme as well. And the risk position, if you like, has been increased because of that ongoing pressure. And I'm sure you'll be well aware of the news today that another council has issued a 114 notice today. Nottingham City Council has joined other councils, unfortunately, in that position. And finally, Chair, if I may, just to add two new risks added related to actually both in place and growth, actually waste collection, the project related to alternative weekly collection, which commences in the late summer, autumn, and also procurement in place and growth as well. We've got significant contracts that are due for renewal in 2026, and that carries risk with that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Right, questions from members on the risk register? Okay, Peter?
I do have items 9, which is the climate emergency or failure to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Got a couple on here. So one, both related to governance, really. So the first one is, I know that the Barkham Solar Farm project is progressing, even though one of the key dependencies, the connection date from SSEN, has not been agreed or signed off. There's a verbal agreement, but nothing in writing. So I would be very concerned in terms of continuing to spend money without having a date. And the second piece in terms of governance is that the project has increased in scope without any discussion, certainly within the main council. It's added in to do with mitigation for the impact of climate change on the council, which is an additional scope item compared to the carbon neutrality. So both of those are kind of governance issues. So that's my question is, can we ask the climate emergency team to come and talk to us at a future meeting about governance of this programme, because I don't think it's well managed at the moment.
Yeah, just to point out before I hand over to George, I mean, there is obviously a scrutiny committee for the climate emergency, so I would anticipate that would come through there.
Our responsibility is making sure that it's being managed and the governance is correct in terms of its delivery and whether that matches with this risk register. I don't think it is.
George?
Yeah, so I suppose taking the second one first. So the climate change annual report was presented to full council, I think, in September. And in that report, it makes it clear, I'm sure, that it's a living document, so it's not static in that sense. It changes. It has to respond to issues that are either creating challenges or opportunities. And in the report to full council in September, it set out as part of the plan that new items were added, which would have included the focus on adaptations. So without having the report in front of me, one would have thought that that was the due process that has gone through to raise that issue. But I appreciate you may feel different.
Chair, can I come back on that? So the report goes to council is noted there's no discussion on it. There's no way to vote it down. So it's a noting report. So there's no acceptance of that scope increase by the council. There's no governance around it at all.
Okay, well, we'll take that away. I thought the report was more than just to note. I thought there were recommendations, but it's not in front of me, Chair. So I take your point, Peter. In terms of the solar farms, that I think members have been briefed in previous forums that scheme has, after quite some considerable negotiations and discussions with relevant companies, has progressed. I don't know the exact date of that, but happy to take that away and get a note back to members on where we are with that particular project in detail.
So, Chair, can I just come back? I wasn't asking for the date. My point is, without a key dependency, that project is progressing, which in my view is a high risk strategy, and doesn't sound like it's being well governed. So, dates aside, which is right, dates would be for the overview, the scrutiny committee, but here it's about governance and whether the risk is too high for that project. I think it is at the moment.
While we're talking about that risk, can I just ask another sort of linked question? So I think the wording of the risk, I'm still not comfortable with myself, because the wording of the overall risk is failure to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So if that's the risk, the risk rating should be in the highest category, because we know we're not going to have a carbon neutral borough. I know in the descriptions it's more about our aspirations and the plan, and if that's the risk, then it makes sense. But to me, having that heading of carbon neutrality by 2030, we're not going to meet that. So if we could clear up that wording, that would be great.
Yeah, the plan itself, if achieved, won't secure complete carbon neutrality by its end in 2030. As set at the moment, there could be significant investments, changes in government policy, further grants coming in that will change that position. But I think the plan is very clear in terms of its current trajectory. Equally, there are options to offset financial amounts to offset carbon to achieve a neutrality, but those themselves would be very significant and probably beyond the council's means to do that. I take the point in terms of where that means it sits, but I think probably it's maybe about the risk, the failure to achieve the outcomes of the plan may be then better than carbon neutrality, because the outcomes of the plan actually won't achieve carbon neutrality without significant investment. Does that make sense, Chair?
That's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Peter, do you have some other questions you want to carry on?
I do, thank you, Chair. Item 4, local plan update. The dates on that slide page don't appear to be correct. It says next local plan consultation stage in November 2023. It says on track. My understanding that's been pushed out to February next year. Is that correct?
So yeah, just so slightly long answer is that we are still waiting for the government's publication of the revised national planning policy guidance. That's significant for the borough because the anticipation is that that policy will set out that you can take account of over delivery of housing, and that would mean that our housing number then is lower than what we would have had to provide. So we are keen to progress as soon as possible. You're right, we're in November now, about to touch into December. Once that framework has been published, then we will take it as quickly as we can forward through the process. But I think you're right, Peter. It could say January, it could say February now, given that we're closing towards the end of the year, aren't we? So I'll take that point. Yeah.
I'll make a helpful suggestion. Perhaps after Regulation 19 close brackets, you should put a dash to say dependent on the government's NPPF publication, just so that we know that there's a dependency there.
Yeah, I'll comment. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from members? Mike.
Just around the finance risk, where I was waiting for other people to ask questions, but I'll jump in then, where it's now, I guess, in the top right-hand corner. Several things in it. I guess there is a cost reduction programme going on at the moment, so I wonder if that's really should be brought out more in the mitigating actions. We got the 3.6 million estimated deficit for the year. Because we haven't got any recent accounts on the web, I wasn't sure how much of our general fund brought forward is available to cover that. So that would be quite useful to know. Most of my experience being in commercial side, as you know, of business. If we were in the top right-hand corner, I think we would be looking at initiatives to freeze recruitment. But I've seen a lot of adverts for new staff on social media recently going out. So I want interesting management comments on that. I think there has been a redundancy programme. I don't know where we are on that as well. So there's sort of general points there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And I'll add to those if that's all right while we're talking about this risk. I mean, it is obviously very concerning that the risk is in the top right-hand corner, and even the target is now up there almost in the top right-hand corner of the grid. So I just wanted to check my understanding in terms of the reserves actually, and the sort of brought forward, as Mike said. So in the commentary, it says that the forecast overspend is 3.6 million for this current year. I think that's correct. And I seem to remember that general reserves were predicted to be around 9 million by the end of this year. So am I right then that over a third of those reserves, if that forecast is correct, would go? Is it? I just want to check that understanding. And if that is correct, does that mean that the general reserves are falling to a level that is not considered kind of financially acceptable? The other area I just wanted to pick up was the capital, the gap of 35 million that's referenced in the capital. In terms of what's the impact of that? So is it just that, you know, there's 35 million pounds worth of projects that we can't do that we want to do, or is there a more significant sort of serious impact arising if we can't fill that gap? So just to add a few more on, and I'm sure finance colleagues may want to come in as well.
Chair, I'll make a start, and I think probably Graham will want to come in as well, Graham, if that's okay. You're already on the screen in preparation, Graham. Thank you. But if I make a start, and then you can take it from there, particularly on the detail of the scale of the reserves and where we're at with that. But just to go back to the key question. First question, is there a cost reduction process in place? Absolutely, there is. All directorates have a clear savings programme. That savings programme went through due process last year. We're implementing it now, and we're going through. We're probably 2/3 now way through presenting our new savings programmes through a different ONS, or Overview and Scrutiny Committee, setting out changes to both our revenue budget and our capital budget, and for example, placing growth around 2.5 to 3 million pounds worth of savings each year as a net position. There's areas of growth and there's areas of saving. So significant work happening there. In addition to that, you'll see that the main pressure from a financial point of view is from children's accommodation, adults accommodation, and then demand in those areas as well, from temporary accommodation and housing related, and other factors such as inflation and such like. There are groups set up, and we banded them. You may recognise the terminology in terms of gold and silver. So a corporate gold group looking at the overall budget position of the council meets every week to review the financial position of the council and to ensure that the sub-silver groups are actioning their particular tasks, and those silver groups relate to those key areas of accommodation, home to school transport being a key area as well, and our overall position. So there is a lot of governance in place in terms of managing that position. We have, you'll know that section 114 puts, once you serve that, you have significant cost controls in place. Now, for us at the moment, because of our financial position, we're and Graham will explain, in a good position when it comes to our reserves. Nevertheless, we have put in cost controls, and so we have changed the delegation afforded to officers so that decisions on spend are made higher up the organisation, and there's real scrutiny over that spend. What can we stop? What can we reduce? For example, what can we delay? There's also a control in place in all directorates related to staff recruitment as well, and a working assumption, which is, you know, what else can we do instead of recruiting to those posts? Can we do things differently? Stop, reduce, again, questions, and also factors such as we're looking at the team itself that's remaining. If you've got lots of vacancies in that team, then it may be appropriate to recruit. We're obviously a large organisation, significant employee numbers, so we will continue to recruit where we have to, particularly in those areas where we've got statutory duties to provide services. I think probably just in terms of capital, and then I'll hand over to Graham. So I explained through the overview and scrutiny process, we're looking at our revenue. We're doing the same with capital as well, presenting reprofiled cases or new cases for capital, but also thinking about a much slimmer capital programme from 24-25. And there is a consequence of that. There are things that need to be delayed in that process, and there are pieces of work which are quite critical pieces of infrastructure, but they need to go hand in hand with the monies arising. So take, for example, South Wokingham New Road, very much linked to further housing coming forward in that area, and a clear position of the council, which is it will not sign a Section 106 agreement at the moment to allow that development to gain planning permission until we're in a place where we know we can deliver that road in a financially sustainable way. So hopefully that's helpful, but I'll pass on to Graham on the detail of the reserves, if that's okay.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Chair. So I think as George mentioned sort of earlier, that the positive Wokingham have is the level of reserve and balances. So the number that the chair quoted of 9 million is our specific general fund reserve, and that's at a particular percentage of our spend, which is the £9 million. So whilst, as you say, at the moment there's a £3 million pressure, and George has just identified and detailed with you a number of things in place to both reduce costs, reduce demand. We have a number of other reserves that we can review alongside things like the capital programme, where we can change our borrowing level to bring that back in line. So we will be able to, or we're working and obviously presenting options through to overview and scrutiny over the past month that will keep our general fund balance at that £9 million sort of figure or thereabouts, that gives us a stable backdrop. The reason I think overall it's still shown as it is in that top corner is that whilst we do have reserves, those reserves can go very quickly. So if those sort of actions that George has highlighted, managing demand, reducing our costs, obviously inflation has been a huge pressure for us. If we don't address them quite urgently, that reserve position can change very quickly, and then you can move into a position of potential bankruptcy quite quickly. We're not there at the moment. We have time, and we just need to make the right decisions around the budget this year and next year to ensure that position maintains. And there's some of those are difficult decisions.
Thanks, Graham. Mike, do you want to come back, and then I'll bring in Sandeep and then David?
Yeah, the figure I've got here on these draft 22 accounts was 9 million general fund at the end of the year. What's the balance on 1st of April 2023? A year later.
I don't know whether Mark's got that in front of him. If not, I'll provide it to the exact figure.
That's the crucial number, isn't it? Because that's what you'll be offsetting the 3.6 million against. And if we're the 3.6 million deficit this year, is it projected it will be zero next year? Is that the objective? So there won't be a deficit in the next year. Otherwise, you're absolutely right. Those reserves won't exist anymore. Finally, the other thing Nottingham did get caught out about, and I think it goes back a year or two ago, some of the other reserves they were using to almost support the general fund. So I understand what you're saying about you've got strong other reserves, but we need to be very careful that they're not utilised for the general fund, or to subsidise, if you like. Thank you.
Agreed.
Graham?
Can I let Mark fill you in with the exact numbers?
It was just to confirm the opening general fund balance is 9.1 million as at the 1st of April 23, and obviously depending on the overspending year that will reduce accordingly. I think in the Q2 report that went to executive and public, that general fund balance was just under 7 million, forecast to be 7 million at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And Graham, did you have a comment on that, Mike's points about using other reserves and the risks of doing that?
Yeah, no. A report was put to overview and scrutiny. I can't remember which date, but I can share the date so you can all look at that report. And that outlined what reserves we have, what they're out there on for, and how those reserves balance up our overall appetite of risk and commercial position. Mike's absolutely spot on. You can use reserves and they can help you get into the right position. What you can't do, and where a number of authorities have failed, is use them to prop up annual costs, because you've then got the same position next year and a whole load of more savings. So what we're ensuring we do is, where we use reserves, it's used in an area we don't need them, where they're allocated, but we're using them for a one-off, which sets us in the right place going forward. What you'll see if you look at the overview and scrutiny papers is that whilst we have a challenge next year, so this year, there is a further financial gap still the following year and the year after. So this pressure does not go away, and we need to continue to look at more and more options for bringing our costs and our service in line with our financial means. So it's by no means sorted. If we get through this year with the right balances, there's still some very big challenges ahead.
Okay, thank you. If I could bring in Sandeep now.
Thank you, Chair. Just while we're on the numbers, just a point of clarification, Graham, perhaps you can help. I was surprised to see the inflationary pressures go up next year from this year, and how that reconciles with the macro trend. And the point really is around how accurate we think our forecast of that number is, and then therefore the deficit that's projected.
I could provide you something on the breakdown and calculation of that interest. My gut feel, and I need to check it back, is some of that will be still catching up for the increase in interest in this year above what we expected in the first instance. So we're sort of still catching up from what we're facing this year against what we budgeted, which is partly around why that £3 million gap is in place. The inflationary pressure has been huge this year, especially as you'll be aware around things like social care. The costs in that area have gone up massively. George has already highlighted some things around children's transport, things like that. There's been some areas of huge cost inflation now, refuse collection, that type of thing. So I can provide a breakdown of how that 21 million is made, but it's sort of a compound issue over a couple of years.
Okay, thank you. That would be useful. I just would have expected at least to be flat or slight step down into next year, but if you've got the detail, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And David?
Thank you, Chair. George, thanks for coming. Great to see you again. I just want to maybe join two issues together, because you mentioned about the Section 106 issues with the new road going in. Obviously, a great interest in me being in my ward. And clearly the mention there that there's been difficulties getting signature across the board with the developers. I know that's something that's been highlighted by officers. It does rather contradict the statement, though, you made, that I'm hearing very optimistic views coming out about spades going in the ground soon, when you've said that you're not going to start anything until it's sustainable. Can I ask directly, are there any conversations going on with developers for other sites that are not currently identified in the existing adopted local plan that might be being used to fund that, or might be envisaged to fund that?
In terms of the South Woking road, the road itself?
Correct, yes.
Are there conversations with other developers not related to South Wokingham?
No, are there any conversations with developers? Because the developers that are currently having problems are all in the existing local plan, so that is blocked. Given I'm hearing it is going to start soon, that suggests there's conversations with developers not in that existing local plan that would be needed to fund that. I just want to see if that is the case or not.
So I'd need to check with the planners. I don't know of any conversations. I think the key issue for us is work with Homes England in terms of how they might support the delivery of that road, or support the council when delivering that road, and that's where the discussions are happening at the moment. Clearly, you'll know, new development delivers a seal receipt, and that seal receipt will come over a period of time. But in terms of forward funding a road, or the delivery of that road in one piece, then that would have a big implication for the council, not least in interest charges and risk associated with that. So the principle of getting support for that piece of infrastructure from Homes England is one that we are pursuing.
No, thank you. And we're obviously meeting later in December, so maybe I'll clarify what I mean by my question. We can answer.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that we're primarily concerned about appropriate governance and controls as the Audit Committee. I think that's where we come in. And what I'm hearing, and maybe George can just clarify, or Graham or somebody, my understanding is that where we could just have been ignoring the situation and continuing as we were, it seems from what you were saying that the directors and the officers are taking sort of some preemptive action to look at what's coming, look at what they can do, and take appropriate actions to try and control these costs, manage that to the best of your ability. So rather than going off a cliff, as some councils have done, we're trying to sort of do everything possible within that team to try and manage, albeit there are some things that are outside of your control, like you can't control the amount the government reduces in terms of our money coming into the council. We can't control inflation, which is worse here than in many other countries, as we know, and is affecting our residents as much as it is the council. But also, so I think I just wanted to be assured that we are taking those steps, because I thought you said we were. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on was where it comes to staff recruitment, because I heard about maybe we should have a recruitment freeze, and I could see some logic in that, because it may be a way of artificially controlling costs. But as was mentioned, we do have some statutory responsibilities, and we also have some non-statutory that we don't want to just sort of not be able to do things. That would seem a bit bizarre. And my understanding generally, and maybe you can clarify this, is that where we have to recruit staff, we're only recruiting where it's necessary. So there is a review being done before, but so we're not just saying, well, there's someone resigned, let's just recruit the replacement. And also I would like to some assurance that the costs are being looked at in terms of maybe we're looking at having employees rather than agency, because agency can often be more expensive. And therefore, if we are able to recruit staff, that might be better. And also, you might get greater loyalty from a staff member than an agency person. And also you don't have the risk of churn, which can be quite disruptive, where they may be off on the next 6-month contract if they're being offered more money somewhere else. I just thought that I'd just like a bit more clarity as to what the directors are doing to try and manage these things and ensure that we are doing everything possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So I won't repeat, I suppose, what I've said earlier in terms of some of the examples that are in place at the moment. The gold and those silver groups very much focused on our financial sustainability. But absolutely, there is significant work throughout the council with staff engagement on the need to ensure that we are financially sustainable going forward. And a call to arms, if you like, to all staff to support that particular approach. And as I said, those weekly meetings with corporate leadership team focused on the big financial challenges that we've got. And I won't rehearse those again, but you'll know those related to accommodation and school transport, etc. Very much a focus of leadership's time and senior officer time. But just to emphasise again, that call to arms has gone to the organisation in terms of we can be supporting the council's position. And it's really important that staff themselves are engaged on that and understand the need to secure savings where possible. The staff, so there is no staff recruitment freeze. There is a recruitment control going on, and I think there's a quite difference between the two. And the reason for saying that is that we are not a 114 council, so therefore, those really difficult places where literally non-statutory work stops in some cases, we are taking quite careful controls with staff. We're asking where there are vacancies for business cases essentially to be produced, for those to consider what alternatives we've got in terms of stop, reduce, do less of, delay in some cases. We're asking whether there can be some smaller kind of reorganisations, if that helps to bring efficiencies. We are though still very open to the fact that in some areas there are increasing demands. And I'll give you an example of that, where we've got vacancies in our homelessness housing team, and you will know probably from further figures and performance data that the number of presentations to our housing team is around 20% up in the last 6 months or so. So where you've got demand coming in and a hugely vital service for residents, and we're thinking very carefully, that is not the place for vacancies. However, there may be more acceptable vacancies elsewhere in the organisation. So there's a really considered approach to staff controls. Ultimately, we are making savings and we are looking at reducing those staff. But you mentioned things like not spending less on agency and recruiting our own. Other things I think are important, where you've got maybe a higher grade officer post, maybe that could be replaced with a slightly lower grade post. We could use the apprenticeship levy, or we could fill it with an apprentice maybe. All those questions need to go into the mix, so we're making really sensible, considered decisions. I mentioned again earlier on about the fact that we just need to make sure that when we are looking at vacancies, that the team that we're taking that vacancy, if the vacancy is there, where is that team in terms of its existing staff? If it's already got 4 or 5 officers down, have a team of 7 or 8, then we need to ask ourselves, is that fair? Is that right? Can it deliver a service still, albeit at a bronze level rather than perhaps a higher level? And is that fair on the team and their well-being? All of those factors need to be put into the mix. So it's a very long answer, Chair, but I thought it was worth just going through that process, if that helps, Stephen.
Yeah, Stephen, come back and then I'll come to Mike.
Just very briefly, thank you for that, George. That was a very good, comprehensive answer. Appreciate that. I was very pleased to hear that you mentioned well-being for staff within that, because this is clearly important, that we don't want to be having high levels of sickness or absenteeism or putting staff under undue pressure. They're already working very hard. We know that, and we do appreciate it. So I just think maybe from my perspective, I'd just like to thank the directors and the officers for what you're doing, because I think this is unprecedented times. We've used that term many times in the last few years, but I just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing, because that sounds like you're working extremely hard on that. So thank you.
I mean, I'd echo what Stephen says, but I would, I'm afraid, go back to say, look, this is our number one risk. And if the actions you've already mentioned are resulting in a deficit this year, deficit the next 2 years, is that going to be sufficient to stop us going the way that, say, Nottingham's gone or something? So what else are we going to do to turn it around if those things you've already mentioned we're doing already and are not covering the gap?
Yeah, so those figures, so the 3.6 is from September, last report. Lots of work since then. Yeah, and whether what we're doing at the moment is going to be sufficient going forward 24-25 is really hard to say when you've got a forecast 5 million gap at the moment going on. So what we will continue to do is do what we can to reduce that deficit, but be mindful that there may be further actions that we may need to take. There are degrees of uncertainty in terms of what the government's grant would be to us, the scale of that, issues around the question about the level of inflation, as was asked earlier on, which may help our position. But no doubt, if we continue to find that we cannot meet that gap, we will know the level of reserves that we've got, which puts us in a reasonable position going forward. We're not on the edge like some other councils are, not too far away from here. And then we will take a view about what else we need to do. But I think the challenge for us is not to when you stop, reduce, delay services, then that has an impact on our communities and our residents and our businesses. And we just need to be really careful about making considered decisions. Now, this time at the moment, I think we're taking at pace difficult decisions. Those decisions may become even more difficult with, with our exec team in due course. Hope that answers in some way.
I think I understand what you're saying. What we don't want to be in a position where those decisions are taken away from us.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Peter and then Sandeep.
More of an observation for Mike, and I wouldn't suggest we rely on this, but in last year, the outturn on the budget in the last quarter, £1.4 million of underspend were carried forward. So that made us, instead of going down to 7.7 of the general fund balance, made us 9.1. So it may happen again, maybe 3.6 million will be found.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question on the new risk that was introduced around procurement. I'd love to hear about benchmarking in that space and any enhancements that have been made more recently, given the situation.
So to put it into context, in 2026, we've got significant contracts, highway contract, our waste contract, the grounds maintenance contract, street cleaning contract, all due in 2026. There's others of a lesser value, domestic abuse contract as well in that year. Hence the risk situation. What we have, some of those contracts can be extended. And we're looking very carefully at whether that's the right thing to do. In terms of the process that we've gone through recently, we've got consultants appointed to help us understand the market, understand the cost situation, understand what the art of the possible is. We've opened up a series of market engagement sessions, inviting in potential contractors as to what they think they could offer, where they think efficiencies can be made, where savings can be made, and where we have an option to extend the contracts, have then gone into negotiations with those current contractors. The risk, I think, for the council is clearly financial. There is a service risk as well. Some of these services are absolutely fundamental in terms of the place itself. Direct services to residents, for example, waste contract. So bin collections basically from each resident's house. And also the challenge which actually comes with managing significant change all in 1 year, all the legal implications, IT implications. So there's a big risk around that for us as well, which we need to factor in. We've got appropriate governance in place in terms of how we are working through those issues, and councillors in the room will be aware that we have started some initial briefings just to update members. We gave members an update on the waste procurement process at the same time as we were updating on alternative weekly collections. And that concluded in a briefing to Ordnance and Overview and Scrutiny Committee last month. And then we'll do further briefings as the year progresses next year, so the members are up to speed on the journey that we're taking on this. That helps, Chair.
Yeah, that does help. Just come back on that. So thank you. It sounds like you're thinking about all the right things. Any early results on the cost benefit of having consultants come in? I assume it's positive overall, as opposed to being a drag.
Well, it's early days at the moment, and there will be decisions that we can make about the service that we want. So I think that is where the challenge is really, is that, clearly if you're asking a contractor to do something, you're specifying what that something is, and you can choose what that something is. But that needs to be fully discussed with members and agreed in terms of an outcome, because the outcome needs to be socialised and known and understood before we then agree for that contract. So you've got a choice here to make about what service you procure. Essentially, I'm sure you know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to draw this item to a close unless there's any other burning questions. Okay, Mike, last question from Mike then, please.
Risk 15 and 22 both deal with immigration and refugees. central government have announced that they are going to empty out all the hotels. There's at least one in our borough. Is that going to have any implications for our children's services or our adult services or our housing services?
So there are no plans at the moment to close the hotel currently in the borough, but there is. You're right. The government has announced quite a number of closures. Though the hotel is occupied by adult males, it's not for families or children. Clearly, we are work very closely with the Home Office and the provider who organises the hotel to ensure that there is appropriate mechanisms in place should it become clear that somebody in that hotel is young and needs a different level of support and care. So that's very much a focus for us. In terms of our team, we've got a team that's focused on immigration, asylum seeking issues that's supported people who have come across from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, and more recently Afghanistan, for example. Our duties to adult males are different than our duties to families and to children, but we're well aware of the additional burdens that can put onto the organisation. And whilst we have additional funds that come from supporting immigration and certain cohorts, that again is a finite pot, and we need to be really careful with that. So we're managing the budget that we've got. It's absolutely right that it's a risk here, because that risk is more financially burdensome when you do have children. And I'm sure you're aware that we have an ask from government that we house up to 41 asylum seeking children. The cost of that is significant. And the cost becomes even more significant for the council when those kids become over 18, because the funding that we get from that cohort drops considerably. So the hotel itself, I think, to answer your question, is not, I think, a big issue of risk. We just need to be very careful of supporting the cohorts and that to move to where they want to be and help with that particular process. The biggest risk for us is asylum seeking children and the costs associated with that.
Thank you,
Chair.
Okay, thank you for all of your contributions, George. I think we'll move on to the next item now, which is the internal audit Quarter 2 progress report. So I think we've got Catherine online to talk us through this one. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I have two reports coming to you this evening. The first one is agenda item 42, which is on pages 53 to 74 in the agenda pack. And this is a Quarter 2 progress report for the Internal Audit and Investigation Service. Members of the committee are, I'm sure, by now familiar with the format of the report. I last reported progress against the Internal Audit and Investigation Plan to the end of June, and this report updates with information to the end of September. At Appendix A1, which is on pages 69 to 72 in the pack, this shows the position of work against the plan to the end of September. It shows audits that have been finalised, those at draft stage, any work in progress, and also the audits that have not yet been started. And particularly, you'll be able to see the key corporate risks that are being audited and are going to be audited to the end of the year. In the appendix, highlighted in yellow, if they're on the screen, or if you're using hard copies of the report, they'll be in grey. These show the movement since Quarter 1. Just to make it easier for members to reference the additional work that's been undertaken in the quarter. I also will draw your attention to the high risk concerns. Our work through the year ensures that we continue to follow up those on a regular basis. The high risk concerns are summarised on pages 62 to 64. And I noted at the last audit committee that members noted there were quite a number to be addressed by the end of September. So we've undertaken the work in this area, and we've confirmed that the concerns have either been implemented or there have been some deadlines that have been extended. Where there are extended deadlines, I've discussed this with the audit team just to make sure that these are reasonable requests for extensions, and generally we felt that they were. The reasons have been largely due to resourcing and needing to recruit into roles to be able to undertake the controls that were required. To supplement the ongoing work that we do on the high risk concerns, we do have specific follow-up work on 3 of the audits that are listed there. So for the remainder of the financial year, we'll be looking at recruitment and safeguarding, reconciliations and debtors in a bit more detail. So we'll be able to follow report back and our detailed testing at the next meeting. In terms of work finalised in the quarter, there was one audit that attracted the 3rd category of audit opinion, and that was in terms of information governance. And from that, we have an action plan that's been prepared and agreed with management, and progress is being made with that. And as usual, I've given a copy of the report to the chair of the Audit Committee. And then just another point to note, in the quarter, we've actually appointed to the internal audit apprentice role. They started 2 weeks ago. And we also have recruited to the corporate investigation officer role, and they start with the team on Monday. So there's been 2 positive developments since the last audit committee. So I'm happy to answer any questions that members might have.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions, comments from members? Okay, Mike.
On page 65, halfway down on the left-hand side, where we're talking about category 3 and 4 audit opinions, you talked about ensuring all officers complete the mandatory data protection learning module. This is something we asked about last time. I'm kind of interested in how many have completed it in terms of percentage of the cohort that should be completing it.
Right, we did ask for an updated report from HR since the audit was undertaken, and there was an improvement in the figures. I'm not sure if Andrew has that information to hand at the moment. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I've got the latest information on that. So the percentage of staff who've now completed the training is at 93%. So that's an improvement since the audit fieldwork was done. We've got a target of the end of December to get the remaining 7% complete, and I'm confident that we will achieve that.
Okay, other questions from members? Okay, I think that the report is so well written, Catherine, that we don't have many questions. I mean, I think the only thing I would say, it is quite striking that there are, and I've raised this with you previously, that there are sort of 9 high risk concerns that have been, the target date has been extended, and some of those have been extended by a year. So that does sort of surprise me that if those are high priority, then why would they be extended that long? But you have addressed that. I think it's just something we will monitor as a committee going forward. Mike, did you want to come back?
Yes, sorry, I have another question. You very kindly forwarded to all of us the whistleblowing referrals.
Yes.
Kind of what I was looking for last time was just to understand how many of the issues raised, and it says they're resolved, but it doesn't say actually whether they're resolved as in the issue was a real issue or it was found not to be a significant issue. And it was that sort of, was the, I don't want to use the word allegation because I don't think it's the right word, but the issue raised, was it a valid one or was it resolved amicably?
Yeah, perhaps Catherine, we can take that one away in terms of how we present that in the report, just maybe a little bit more granularity on that part of the reports to address that. Yeah. Okay, anything else from members? No. Okay, we'll move on then. So the next item is also Catherine, I think, which is the review of the anti-fraud, anti-corruption, etc. policy. So Catherine, you introducing this one.
Right, thank you. So this is item 43 in the agenda pack, which is pages 75 to 144. So the fraud policies have all been refreshed, and this is to make them more clear, readable and understandable. We've also used the Council's Guide to Communication Style. In refreshing them, we don't want to dumb them down too much, because obviously these are prime documents that will be used in disciplinary hearings, employment tribunals and court hearings. There are 6 policies altogether, one of which is the enforcement sanction policy. Now that's with the legal team to refresh. So we've made updates to the other 5 policies. Now overall, there's been no changes to technicalities in any of the documents. There was only one main change, and that was in respect of the RIPA policy. And that was where we had an investigation by the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office last October, and they made a suggestion that we might want to make the senior responsible officer for RIPA, for it to move from being the chief executive to the assistant director of governance role. And that is purely just through to the practicalities if we needed to use that facility in the future. So that's the only main technical change. In terms of publicity and training, once these policies have been approved, they will be made available on SharePoint and on the council website. And we will also be looking to do some training for officers, and I'll be looking whether we could do that through the e-learning modules and the council's website. So the policies, a clean copy of the policies is attached at Appendix A, and there's also a copy at Appendix B with all the track changes, so you can see where those changes have been made. So the report's coming to Audit Committee to agree the proposed amendments and recommend those for approval to Council via the Constitution Review Working Group, and I believe the next meeting is the 4th of December. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'd like to take these in turn, actually, if that's all right with members, because there's quite a lot here. So if we could start with the anti-fraud policy. So questions on the anti-fraud policy. So Peter and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So I was looking through the anti-fraud section, and the bit that I couldn't find was, and I know there's been a report recently of this happening in other authorities, is the issue of moonlighting. So where officers, with a space and lack of monitoring in terms of working from home, are able to take on other jobs, to paying jobs. How it should be mentioned in here, both in terms of something that we should be looking at. I know it's fraud, but it's a specific type of fraud that we should be making sure that we're mindful of. I have no idea how you combat that, but it needs to be in our policy.
Right, I can take.
Yeah,
Sorry.
is that something we can just consider in terms of whether it is properly covered in any of these sections? Yeah. Okay. And then, is that all right, Peter? Yeah. And then Mike next.
Yeah, a couple of things. One of it is just purely continuity in terms of terminology. In a number of places throughout these 6 documents, you often refer to the Assistant Director Governance (brackets and Monitoring Officer). In many places, you don't have the and monitoring officer bits, and it's just being consistent. So that might just be wanting to look at. Right. But what I've got a slight concern about the way this works under 9.4.6, raising concerns, the paragraph down, when management receives concerns from officers or others regarding potential fraud, they must immediately contact the Assistant Director Governance and Monitoring Officer with details. The Assistant Director will make initial preliminary inquiries and in consultation with Section 151 officer will determine whether any grounds for investigation. I was kind of a bit concerned if that's sufficient overview of that process. So it's putting an awful lot of emphasis on the governance and monitoring officer to actually make those preliminary inquiries kind of on their own. And it's kind of almost implicit and then in consultation. I just wonder whether it was a bit.
Okay, I might bring Andrew in at this point.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify that then. So Obviously, I am the Assistant Director of Governance, that's monitoring officer. So what would happen in practice in terms of those initial inquiries? So I've got a team of people, including Catherine's team, but also a legal team. So I would use some of those resources to make those inquiries. So yes, it isn't just one single officer. It's just that I am responsible for making sure those initial inquiries are undertaken appropriately.
I think that's the concern. The way it reads to somebody outside, it's one individual, not a team. It also links in with 9571. 9571. In that particular case, it says that in all cases where I'm still in the same document, aren't I?
It's the whistleblowing policy 9571, I think you're referring to. Yeah.
Yes. So it shall notify the monitoring officer and the deputy chief. So that seems to be slightly different from the investigate and consult. The two don't seem to work quite clearly together.
Right. We can just make it a bit clearer on the wording, I think, on both those documents. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
I had a question also on 946 raising concerns. I guess I was a little surprised in the last sentence, if officers feel they're unable to use internal routes, they should contact the auditors. I'm a bit surprised that your external auditors are part of the integral programme whistleblowing. Normally they stand apart because they're independent, that's their role. Certainly for PLCs, normally that sort of role would go to an independent senior director on the board. And I wondered whether it would be more appropriate, maybe if a senior counsellor should hold that role, just because of the independence of the auditors.
Hey, Catherine, did you want to come back on that point?
I can take that away, and we can, consider that as well. I think, yeah. I think it's just a standard process. You'll see all councils have that sort of, they'll exhaust all the internal reporting first, then they go to external audit, and then they can go to an external body as well, which used to be public concern at work. So it's now called Protect. So it's just to give those opportunities, but I can take away and come back to you on that one if that's all right.
Yes, I guess concerned with conflict of interest. Thank you. Independence.
Okay, and Stephen?
Just to pick up on Mike's point, which is an interesting idea, I just wondered whether there might be model policies issued by the local government association or some other body, whichever is appropriate, that we can utilise to sort of check that we're not getting out of step with best practice, really. That was just my thoughts. Thank you.
We do compare our policies with other councils as well. And a few years ago, well, a couple of years ago, I did have a training company actually review all our policies for us just to make sure that we weren't missing anything. And they confirmed, they did make some suggestions and those were all taken into account at that point. So they have had an external review by, a professional training company as well, if that gives some reassurance.
Okay, thank you. I had a few points on the fraud policy. So just about the definition of fraud. So this is on page 79. There's a focus here on distortion of records. So we define fraud as intentional distortion of financial statements or other records. I think that could be broadened because, theft is listed on as a potential fraud on the list, but theft can obviously happen without any distortion of records. You've also got sort of false representation, failure to disclose information, abuse of position. These are all things that can occur without a distortion of records. So just might consider just broadening that definition a bit. There's also a focus on financial gain in that definition as well, which largely I imagine, fraud is to do with financial gain, but it could be some other personal gain, a status or something else. It's not necessarily always financial. So again, we might just broaden that out a bit.
Okay, yeah.
In terms of the training, you mentioned the training in your introduction, and that there is a point in here about assistant directors must ensure that officers are aware of the procedures and aware of the relevant rules and regulations. But I think we could have more in here about what actual training happens, or what must, what regular training must happen. Is it every year? Is it particular departments? And also what regular awareness raising is there? Or is this just a policy that sits on a shelf and no one looks at it? I'm sure it isn't, and I'm sure those things happen, but I think we can reference them in here.
Yeah,
sorry, go on. Yeah.
I think we'd look to make it part of the mandatory training programme that the council has. So there is a requirement to do that mandatory training, say, on an annual basis, and this would form part of that as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think we should reference that in the policy. And then lastly, you mentioned not, that we don't want to dumb it down, and I understand that in terms of it being a crucial document for various sort of processes. But I think we can we can have all of that, but we can also make it more accessible. So, you could have some sort of do's and don'ts in here, for example, for what to do if you discover a fraud or you suspect a fraud. Just as an example, or you could just, include some examples just to bring it to life a bit. So what the key risks of fraud in a local authority, just picking out a few examples in there just to sort of bring it to life, because it's, it's very easy for these things to become quite long and sort of, difficult to access documents. So that would be my sort of recommendation. So hopefully you might consider a few tweaks in that regard.
I think that's something we would do on the face of the website as well, just to make it high level, and then draw people in to actually look at the policies as well, so raise the awareness with the do's and don'ts and the examples.
Yes,
and then they can go into that detail, they can dig down into it if they need to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Mike.
Sorry, I should have mentioned earlier. In terms of consistency, also there's an inconsistency in the use of the word councillors, where in many cases it's got a capital C and in some cases it's got lowercase c's. That needs pushing through. But 9.4.14 starts off, it's titled procedure, and it says all referrals will initially be risk assessed. I'm kind of wondering who's doing the referring. Assume it's the Assistant Director of Governance. I don't know, but it's not entirely clear where these referrals are coming from.
So the referrals will usually come into the internal investigation team, and we then report, if it's a fraud or irregularity, we'll report that to the Assistant Director of Governance, who'll discuss with the Section 151 officer, and then if they feel that they should be progressed, they will come back to the investigation team, and we risk assess them at that point.
Yeah, you see, it's the unfortunate use of the word referral, which appears twice in the same sentence. All referrals will be referred.
Yeah, so perhaps we could just review that sentence to see if it
I'm picking that bit.
Worded a bit more clearly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Jordan.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Anything else on the fraud policy before we move on to the next one? No. Okay. So the next one is whistleblowing. Any comments on the whistleblowing? Mike. Yeah.
In the first introduction, why doesn't the whistleblowing policy also apply to councillors? It only mentions officers, former officers, agents, and contractors.
Right. It can make reference to the councillors. I don't know, Andrew, did you have any comments on that?
We'll take that away, Mike. What I would say is there's a process for councillors in terms of the member code of conduct, if that's what you're thinking of. Okay, yeah, we'll pick that up.
Okay.
I think there's a risk if we don't explicitly call out councillors there, it'll imply that we can't rather than being assumed we can.
Okay. Any other points on the whistleblowing? Okay. Yeah, Mike.
So you've got examples of whistleblowing concerns. I'm just conscious it's probably not an exhaustive list, and perhaps we ought to make that point. That list is not exhaustive. It's on the bottom of page 121 on the annotated one.
I can include that.
Okay.
Yes.
The only point I had was that it's a very minor one. It's just in the introduction. It just struck me where it says to encourage you to raise concerns about my. Does it say who you is? And it just sort of jarred a bit. I don't know whether we could rephrase that to encourage the raising of concerns or something. It just stuck out that we weren't using that direct address to the reader in any other places.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else on the whistleblowing? No. Okay. So we'll move on to the bribery policy. Any comments or questions on the anti-bribery? Okay, Mike.
We all to very carefully read the first sentence, particularly the bit that says, or second sentence rather, particularly the bit that says Wokingham Borough Council does pay bribes.
Does not. It's,
Not in there.
it does not. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought, oh, beg your pardon. I thought I'm misreading where the. Sorry, I did have another point. 9.6.6 under adequate procedures refers to recommended areas of 6 principles. But I'm kind of struggling as to where those 6 principles are defined. This is right in the middle of page 131.
Yeah. Okay. I can include those in there.
And they are?
And it should be principles LE, not AL.
Yeah.
Now we're getting picky. Yeah, I think that's a fair point though. It's not clear what the principles are. Anything else on the bribery? Yeah, Mike?
I've got something on gifts and hospitality, 9.6.15. The register, I wasn't sure, and I might have missed it, whether someone not recording any gifts on the register, whether that's a disciplinary matter. I might have missed it, but I wasn't sure if it's on there. But I also was interested on what the process is for approving gifts and hospitality. Is it purely the next manager up who just signs it off, or is there a separate process, as there often is in industry nowadays, that can go to the board or delegated person?
There is a separate process for it. Yeah.
Right.
It's a formalised process.
Okay, so we might make reference to that in here
Yeah,
then, just
okay.
for the extra assurance in this document. Yeah.
But I think there should be incentive people recording on the register as well if it's not covered in the policy. Otherwise, stuff gets left out.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on the bribery policy? Peter?
Sort about the officers, but is there a section on members? Does it mention members? Because not that they've been offered any tickets to the football or anything, but you know, if there's a process for officers, is there not a process for members as well?
I think again we'll just take that away.
That's covered in the member code of conduct.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. Okay, the only point I had was again on training. So I think we should have more in here about what training is done and who does that training. You know, whether is there a particular focus on procurement and other departments that should have greater level of training, or that there's not much in here about the training and about general staff awareness of the policy.
Yeah.
So anything else on bribery before we move on? No. So the next one is the money laundering. Any comments on the money laundering? Yeah, Mike.
I'd rather a pedantic point on 9.7.8. We've got a euros figure compared to a pound figure. It's probably more, without getting political, pre-Brexit exchange rate. So at 1.15, which is today's rate, that's about 11,500 euros.
Okay. I'll make that amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about suspicious activity reports. So this is mentioned on page 102 and it sets out, what they are and who does what. Do we actually regularly submit suspicious activity reports? And the reason I ask that is again to do with this risk that, these are policies which we agree and then, they're sat on a shelf. So Is it something that we actually regularly do, or
We
do
haven't submitted any, no.
Okay. And in terms of the wording on 9.7.4, I just wondered if the wording needed to be updated, because do we accept large amounts of cash these days?
No, we don't.
And do we, send refunds by check? It might be that more up-to-date examples we could use, like paying with stolen credit cards, or asking for paying money and then asking for refunds to a different account. Perhaps the examples just need to be a bit updated there.
Okay.
Any other points? Oh, sorry, I just had one more before I bring in Stephen. Again, it was sort of accessibility point on page 104. There's reference to the reporting form, AML1 form, which is available on the shared drive. Could we make that more accessible? Because if, particularly a new staff member, is not going to know where that is potentially, unless it's on, like you said earlier, the link through the website is all on there, but we might just amend that.
Okay.
And perhaps we could have a separate discussion, Catherine, about the suspicious activity reports and, the reasons why there aren't any. Hopefully that's a good thing, but perhaps we could take that outside the meeting. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just coming back to 9.7.4A, unusually large cash payments. You've got some examples in other parts. I just wondered whether in this area it might be worth giving some examples, because it could be that might be like paying in different aspects of what you're paying for with the council. That could be different values. And I'm just thinking that if you're paying all of the council tax in cash, that would be maybe an unusual thing, but that might be £2,000 or £3,000. Whereas in another context, with paying something, it could be tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I'm just wondering whether that might need a bit more of an explanation so that staff can understand how to interpret what that means.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on to which is the last one, which is the acquisition of communications data and use of covert surveillance policy. Any comments on this one from members? No? Okay, just one final point from me before we move to the recommendation. We don't have a policy, I don't think, on the Criminal Finances Act. So this is an act that came in 2017. It's to do with facilitation of tax evasion. And I know some councils do have a policy on it. I'm sure it isn't that local authorities are not a big risk for this, but it's to do with a corporate offence where someone associated with the organisation facilitates tax evasion, and there aren't robust enough policies and procedures to prevent that. So perhaps again we could get some comment back for the next meeting about whether we should have a policy. If there's a reason we don't, that would be useful.
Right, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, Mike.
Yeah, just one question really related to the recommendations and what we're doing here. It does say on page 75, the Council Anti-Fraud Corruption Policy were last refreshed and presented to the Audit Committee for approval in February 2020. And on page 120 of the track changes one, it says, to this end, the Council maintains a continuous review of these arrangements. But is there a set time period? Is it a 4-yearly cycle that we're going through here? And if so, does it need stating?
Catherine?
I mean, we can state how frequently we will review the policies going forward, yes. We haven't really set a timescale previously, but it's normally been about every 2 to 3 years in practice.
Can I suggest that we say at least every 3 years? Yeah. Would that be? Yeah. And we put that into each of the policies that they will be reviewed at least every 3 years. Okay. So in terms of the recommendations then, if we can have a recommendation, obviously, that we agree the amendments that have been outlined in the track changes, but also that that's subject to consideration of all the points that we've made this evening. Is that okay with members in terms of the recommendation? Okay, can I see all those in favour then? Okay, thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, Catherine,
Okay, thank
and
you.
thanks for going through that. I know they're quite dry, but I think it's important to give them their due attention. So the last substantive item then is the SIPFA management code. So this is obviously a key tool that's especially important with the discussions we were having earlier around financial resilience, and we've talked many times about learning lessons from high-profile failures in the sector. So we last looked at this in March, and this is an update on progress. So we've got Appendix A, which is the current assessment of where we are, and then Appendix B, which is the progress against the specific actions. So Graham, did you want to introduce this and say any more about this item?
I think you've done a perfect job, Chair. Saying the only thing I'd add, so I think we've made good progress. Happy to take questions. There's a couple of the actions, such as training, where the timescales just slipped a little bit because we've aligned it with some corporate projects. So that means that the overall training comes into the corporate training and is more embedded rather than sat alone. But yeah, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, open it up for questions then. Okay, Sam? Graham, have you got a comment on that?
Sorry, Chair, I'm not sure the mic was on. I didn't pick up any sound.
Oh,
Apologies.
sorry.
No,
Yeah,
sorry.
right. If you
Sorry
say
about
that
that. Yeah, I'll
again,
go
Sam.
again. Absolutely.
Sorry.
So yeah, looking on page 149, yeah, it's got here in Appendix A around the complaints, areas for improvement, none. But when I was in the second column, you're talking about the value for money and efficiency approaches. And earlier on, when we were listening to E&Y and the audit team, they mentioned that the value for money area is an area of focus and slight concern. So just keen to understand, maybe that could be included as an area for improvement.
I think EY's language is around generally. It's an area they prioritise and concern. That's not something particularly around Wokingham's position. And I think looking at their previous assessments, they've been comfortable with our value for money position. Obviously, linked back to some of the efficiencies and the overall budget position we've talked about earlier, and George had explained, we're continually looking at value for money. And I think we've got some actions around further benchmarking to make sure our costs are in line or better against anyone else. But yeah, I think EY's comment particularly is just generally that's an area they will look at all councils as a priority.
Thank you, Graham. Other questions or comments? Mike?
Thank you. It's catching. On page 157, section H, talks about Treasury management performance reporting to us every 6 months. Did we decide that wouldn't happen anymore? So I think that could come out.
Yeah, that just needs to be removed, that reference. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then on page 165, section P, on external financial reporting, I wonder whether it really should be amber at the moment, and we'll try to get it to green next year. Certainly in the last published results, and I think we referred to it quite a bit on the audit fee overrun at the last meeting, there were a number of adjusted errors that were put through in the accounts. And I think the auditors today talked about delay in providing some of the information, some of it might not be anything to do with us, might be on external advisors, but either way, there's been delay. So I wonder whether it's really amber at the moment, and we'll look to get it to green with no adjustments to next year's numbers.
Would you agree with that, Graham? Or?
Yeah, I think that the comments made, I wouldn't disagree with the comments made. I guess it would be good to put an action against it, therefore, wouldn't it?
Yep.
to get that into the right place. Which I think something around that kind of getting, I know it's not fully in our remit, but about getting our accounts up to date and signed off is probably the action to get that to green, I think.
Yes, and I think one of the tests would be, are any adjustments made to the numbers presented to the auditors? And that's a test of efficiency, isn't it, as well?
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, and if I might suggest we could put those, because sometimes they'll change numbers and the numbers have no effect on the bottom line. So if we could put something about numbers with a material difference in the position.
Yeah, I mean, you could also split it out into.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Graham, but anyway.
You could also split it out into judgmental areas and just errors, couldn't you? Which the other, the other.
We'll work something up if that's okay.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to check a couple of things. So thanks for your comments on the training. I mean, I think we really do need to get that sorted, but you've raised that already. The asset management plan point. So in terms of the target date for that, I think so this is page 171 to 172. The target date is December 23. Yeah. But in the commentary, it seems to be 1st of April 24. So is it the April date?
It's the April date. Apologies, we updated the text and not the target date at the end. So yeah, the date is April as per the text. Apologies.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other points? Yeah, Mike.
Sorry, one I forgot to mention. On page 169, there's a countermeasure. We talk about published data comparing ourselves with other councils and resilience. That's probably 3 or 4 years out of date now. And I wonder whether there's more current data, particularly with what's going on with financial stability of councils around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So that has been an area of focus. We've signed up something called LG Improved Tool. A lot of the benchmarking data comes from RO and RA forms, so forms we return on the budget and actual spend. This tool is based on people's closing accounts, so there's a little bit of a caveat of the timing on some of those, but it does a whole host of measures, including looking at some of the authorities' last 4 or 5 years before they've gone into 114 notice area. So we've got a whole load of information around that about our resilience. It's far more up to date. Where we're putting that in is you'll be aware that there is a CFO letter that comes to members in January, February next year. Each year, it's a statutory requirement, and we're updating that position and putting more of that context into that document to give members assurance around the resilience of the organisation, with the caveats we've spoken about in terms of the financial pressures that are coming.
I think if some of that was available, I'd be quite interested by it. I don't know whether councillors see that generally, but if they don't, I think that'd be quite interesting for us.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other points on the report from anyone? No? Okay. Well, thanks, Graham, for all the work on that and for bringing us an update. That's useful. Okay, which leaves us, I think, just with the forward programme. So I just had a couple of queries on this. So this is page 175 at the back. Number 9, draft audit results report. What is the difference between that and number 4, which is the auditor's annual report? Are they definitely different items? Oh, is Hannah? Hannah, are you around and able to?
Apologies, I am here. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So on our forward programme, we've got an item, the 2021-22 Auditor's Annual Report, and we've also got the draft audit results report for 21-22. Is that a duplication, or are they two different things?
No, they are two different things.
Oh, okay.
The auditor's The audit results report is the ISA 260 report on the main audit, and the auditor's annual report includes the value for money commentary, which is required under the code audit practice.
Okay.
So yes, we would we intend to bring both to the next committee.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then number 10, just says statements of accounts, and it doesn't say which statement of accounts So we might want to clarify. Yeah, any will be fine. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll clarify that nearer the time. I mean, obviously there's a lot on there for the February meeting. So I think we'll review where we are with various things in the new year. It may be that we decide that it's better to split it up and have a March meeting as well, as I think we did last year. Did anyone have any other comments on the forward programme? No? Okay, right, well, I'll bring the meeting to an end. Thank you very much to everyone for all your contributions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.